Certificates are really one of the hardest things to get right with your Uncanny LP site. Learn-certificates require that you do work a bit with HTML. And it's a lot of trial and error because you can really only see what the certificate is going to look like when you actually earn it and publish it and then see it as a PDF file. So unfortunately, this is one where you probably have to go through each certificate about 10 times or so until you actually get it right. It's a lot of testing and a lot of failure and reattempts until you do actually get the layout the way you need it. So certificates, to set them up, they're under the e-learning menu when you're signed in as an admin on your site. So if we go under e-learning, and I'm going to start off just by looking at an existing certificate. So one of the samples that we've set up on the site. So I'll click on Edit Certificate so I can see what's already there. And you can see it's in the text view of the WordPress editor, and it's a bit messy in here. So you can see at the top, there are a lot of ways to control spacing, but unfortunately all of it needs to be handled with HTML. So one of the ways to do that, you can see here there's a bit of control around line spacing. Instead of these empty paragraphs, I could always change the line spacing here too. This is actually somewhat inconsistent. But the key is you have to expect that there's going to be a fair bit of granular customization and trial and error. So anyway, you can see from this that there is HTML here to control the placement. And then beyond the placement, we've got some shortcodes here to show the first name and last name. And the certificate image itself is set over here as a featured image. So the featured image that we set up in the sample, everything right now is based on North American standards. So paper size is letter, and we use landscape. These can be changed. So if you're in a country that uses A4, you can absolutely change A4. Make sure that your image is sized appropriately. So the images that we generally set up, we size at 8.5 by 11 inches. And then we use 300 dpi for that, or 3300 pixels by 2550 pixels. So we want an exact match for the size that we're targeting, the paper size that we're targeting. So generally what you'll do is any fixed text, any text that's not changing, so text that's not dynamic, should probably be in the image. The exception here might be course name. And the reason we might use course name, like even though it's going to be consistent for the course, it's not changing by the user, the reason you might want to do that is just so you can easily clone the certificate and use it for multiple courses. So as a general best practice, it is a good idea to have one certificate that you use for a specific item, whether it's a quiz or a course, and not to reuse them. So certainly you could reuse them and just like have the course name be dynamic and populated based on the course you're in. The problem with that approach is anywhere you're using a shortcode or a widget to show a user's list of certificates, the earned certificates, if they're the same certificate, then they have the same name and they're going to show up as duplicates. So it's going to seem like the same certificate, even if it's for a different course, just because they would be named the same way then. So that can get confusing, and that's why we suggest cloning certificates instead, so duplicating them, and then using the duplicates instead of the same one across multiple items. You can do it, it's just going to cause confusion if you use any shortcodes for certificates or anything like that. So anyway, that's why I might suggest if you are including the course name, and I can show you an example of that. If you are using the course name, I'd suggest including that here, and then each time you clone it, instead of reproducing the image, you can just populate it in there. So like I could do that even here. So let's do that here, and let's make it I'm going to make this higher so that we can separate it. Actually, before I do that, let's take a look at what this looks like now, and then we can get a sense of that. So right now, again, make sure the image is uploaded. When you're creating this image, try to publish it so that it's under a meg. The rendering time for PDF files can still be a little slow, and just to make things as easy as possible for the user, it's better to have the certificates as small of a file size as possible. So try to target under a meg, even half a meg is perfect for this kind of thing. So right now we've set up these items. I just want to show you what it looks like now. And there's no way to preview this. Like if you try to click on this, unfortunately with the way LearnDash is set up, it's not going to work here. And even if you viewed it as a post, it would just show an image and then the text beneath it, which isn't at all useful. So I'm just going to open this in another tab. What I'm going to do to test my certificate is I'm going to add a new quiz. And this is what we suggest doing when you test yours, because it's the fastest way to quickly cycle through it and make sure it's working as expected. So I'm going to say sample for certificate, and this is one that can be easily deleted later. So I don't need to associate this with anything. The one key thing though is that I do have it associated with a certificate. So you're going to have to publish that certificate first that you just created. You don't have to do any associations here as long as you have the certificate associated with it. So I don't even care about any options. I'm just going to go ahead and publish that. I do need a question though, because I need to be able to complete it and get a perfect result so that I can see what the quiz looks like, or the certificate. So again, I've done the association. The sample quiz has been created now. There are no questions, but I have associated the certificate with it. And I'm going to say choose the correct answer as my title as well as my question. So paste that right there. And this is really, I'm going through this quickly, but this is a really easy thing to set up. So I'm going to say correct. And again, you want it to be as obvious as possible so that there is no way to fail. And then you can cycle through testing really quickly. All right, so that's it. We've got a question. We can go back to the quiz now. I can click on this quiz. And I want to make sure that, I allow multiple reattempts. There are no controls around that. So all I'm going to do is click on correct, finish it. This is going to let me generate the certificate. I can now print the certificate. It's going to open in a new tab, and I can see this is what it looks like. All right. While I'm looking at this seems too high now. So what's the easiest way to do that? Go back to edit it. I'm going to change this right here to 7. Update that. Switch back to my certificate. I'll leave that open still in another tab. Now it's a little low. So you can see just by moving it, the 2 there, that's a little too low. So let's go back. Let's make it 6. And I know that's going to work, so I'm going to leave that. But let's say underneath it, I want the course name just populated in there. So in this case, I'm going to call it course name. In this case, though, I want it, let's make it a little smaller, but a little stronger. So again, this part is tricky just because you will have to know some HTML and CSS to get this working the way you want. So I'm going to make this and see what that looks like. I'm going to push that down even more. I'm going to go 12. And let's go ahead and do that. Now let's see what this looks like. So it should have pushed the Ken Young up a bit. It did. And now you can see this is way too low now, but you can see how it changed things a bit. Actually, the font weight in this case didn't make a difference. It depends again on what fonts are loaded, so maybe that was a bad example. I could have done something with color or something instead. This is way too low, so let's see what going to 2 does for this. You can see though that it is slightly smaller, and when I refresh again, it's still not where I need it. So yeah, then I could just play with this until I get it exactly where I want it. Let's go here. I'm going to make this a little smaller, and let's try that update now. Go back here and refresh it, and if you did close it again, you can retake the quiz again. It's only the one question. And you can see now it is smaller. I'd still probably want to move this up a bit more so I could play with that further. But at this point, you kind of get the idea of how this works. So in terms of the dynamic content, like right now, I'm only populating first name and last name. And you can see from the shortcode, I'm using user meta. So it's pulling it from the user's profile. And this is how I'm populating first name. So it's pulling their first name and the last name from their profile. But there are a lot of more options. So if you click on, there's a link here for certificate shortcodes. So for user meta, if you click this link here, there are a list of options. What else is available in terms of user meta? Like what other profile values can you pull? And if you're setting up custom values, then you could pull those as well, as long as you know how to retrieve them based on the meta key. So the next one can display variable information based on the quiz or the course. Now, with LP, the way it's set up and the way LearnDash works, you can associate certificates with course completion or with achieving a certain threshold on a quiz. So if I go back to my quiz, let me go back and edit this quiz. You might remember that in the area that I was using to associate this quiz with a certificate, there was a section right here to define the threshold. So this is what somebody needs to receive. In this case, 80% or higher would award them the certificate. It doesn't have to match the passing threshold. So maybe they get a certificate at 70%, but they actually pass it at 50%, and the certificate is only for the higher achievers or something. So this can be controlled here. This is what determines, for the quiz, if somebody gets this score and a certificate is associated with it, then they would earn that certificate. For course completion, it's binary. Either they've completed the course or they haven't. And if they've completed the course, then they would be able to, they're awarded that certificate. And when they're awarded that certificate, it shows up on their course page. And also, of course, anywhere you're retrieving a list of certificates for the user. So let's go back a bit then. So when you're choosing to associate it with a quiz or a course and you want to include dynamic information, make sure you're using the correct shortcode. So if you've associated the certificate with a quiz, don't try using quiz info shortcode and values here because it will not work. If you are using the course completion to trigger the certificate, then don't use the quiz info shortcode because that will not work either. So there are a lot of options here. It can include values across quizzes. So you can see here how this works. So there are examples too, and if you want to include date, then for course completion, then you can use this date format. And of course, there's a link here with more information about how you can format those. Generally speaking, we would show the month, day, and year, but we would not show the time. And in some cases, you could even change it so that you can modify this and show it a year in the future or something. But again, you'll have to know how to set that up and understand how to achieve that with HTML. So, and in this case, shortcodes. So anyway, that is essentially how the shortcodes work, how you would populate data into a certificate, and also how you would associate with a quiz or course. Just as a last thing, so there are a couple of options for retrieving certificates. If you're trying to use them, make sure that you've gone into the toolkit and turned those options on. So if you're trying to show, for example, certificate widget, you want that in a sidebar somewhere, make sure you turn this on. Okay, there's also another shortcode, not sure where it is now. Here we go, this one right here. So if you're going to use something, just make sure it's on here if you want to display certificates on the front end. And then the other option too, of course, if you want to send certificates by email, you can do that as well. Again, you'd have to make sure that is turned on. And I'm not sure if it is on this test site. It might be an older version on here. But again, we'll cover that in another topic. And just make sure it only works if your certificate is associated with a quiz. And if you've turned, if over here in these settings, if you've turned on the ability to notify the user. So make sure that's on. Then turn on the certificates as PDF files that get emailed, and then that will work. And that's the way you can make sure that users get a copy of their certificates. Of course, if you're using course certificates, they'd still show up in the widget and shortcodes, and it's an easy way to retrieve it there. And if they go to the course page, they'd see it there as well. So, brief introduction to certificates. Hopefully that helps you get started creating some certificates and populating some dynamic information onto those certificates.